I'm 28 years old. My sister is 23. And for a stretch of a few very long weeks, my entire family expected me to hand her my wedding. The one I'd spent 3 years planning. Without so much as a second thought. Let me back up and give you the full picture. Because a story like this doesn't make sense without the years underneath it. My fiancé and I have been together for 8 years. Engaged for 3 of those. During most of that engagement, I was buried in a PAAHDAADDDDHEHE program. The kind that eats every spare hour you have and then asks for more. Planning a wedding on top of that should have been impossible. But my fiancé carried most of the load. He was the one on the phone with vendors, the one comparing quotes, the one keeping the spreadsheet updated while I was buried in research and coursework. I've never forgotten that, and it's part of why, when everything else in this story fell apart, he was the one person who never wavered. We got lucky with the venue. It's the kind of place that books out years in advance. All stone archways and gardens. Exactly the kind of venue you dream about and assume you'll never actually get. When we called, the only opening they had was 3 years out, in September. Timed almost perfectly with when I'd be finishing my program. We took it without hesitating. Paid the deposit that same week. For 3 years, that date sat on our calendar like a finish line. Something to look forward to through every exhausting semester. My sister got engaged more recently. A few months before everything in this story happened. She and her fiancé, who I want to say up front is a genuinely good guy, were planning something smaller, a spring wedding, the following year. They didn't have a venue locked in yet, but they had some vendors they liked, and a date circled on the calendar. Then came the barbecue. My parents invited the whole family over, partners included. The kind of casual Sunday gathering we'd done 100 times before. Except this one wasn't casual. In front of everyone, my sister announced she was pregnant, and I want to be clear, that moment itself was genuinely happy. Everyone lit up. My brother-in-law looked thrilled, and terrified in that specific way new fathers do. Hugs all around, the works. My grandmother, ever practical, asked the obvious follow-up. Was the spring wedding still happening? Or would they push it back because of the timing with the baby? My sister said she actually wanted to move it up instead, to September. On its face, that wasn't even an unreasonable idea. We don't have a huge number of out-of-town guests, so in theory people could have made both weddings work without much strain. My grandmother, pleased with the plan, asked if she needed help pulling together a wedding on such short notice, and that's when my sister turned to me, in front of the entire extended family, and asked if she could just take my venue. Her exact reasoning was that she couldn't handle the stress of planning an entire wedding on top of maternity appointments, that the venue was so beautiful, and that it would mean everything to her if I let her have it. I want you to sit in that silence with me for a second, because I certainly did. Every single face at that table turned toward me, and I could read the expectation on all of them instantly. Of course you'll say yes. She's your little sister. My brother-in-law, to his real credit, looked mortified. He told her plainly that they'd already talked about this beforehand, and agreed she wouldn't ask me. That it wasn't fair to put me on the spot like this in front of everyone. She waved him off without even looking at him, said something like, "Don't be like that. My sister obviously wants what's best for me. It's no big deal." I said it kind of was a big deal actually, that I'd had my heart set on that venue for 3 years. The tears started immediately. She got up and walked off from the table. My grandmother turned to me and told me I was being selfish, that my sister needed the venue more than I did. I tried to explain myself, and my mother cut in with something that's stuck with me since. She asked what it would have cost me to wait a few extra months, after already waiting 3 years, and pointed out that my sister never asks me for anything, as if that alone should have settled it. My fiancé, who'd been quiet up to that point, finally had enough. A few more comments in that same vein and he suggested we leave. We did. My sister called me crying before we'd even made it home, told me it wasn't fair that I always get what I want, that I could have just done this one thing for her. My dad tried a gentler angle later that night, said in the end it's just a venue. What actually matters is who you're marrying. And look, he's not entirely wrong about that in the abstract, but 3 years of saving, planning, and building an entire vision around one specific place isn't nothing either. By the end of that week, my family was outright threatening not to come to my wedding at all, because I wouldn't hand my sister the venue. A few days after the barbecue, my brother-in-law called me directly. He apologized for the whole situation, told me he'd specifically discussed this with my sister beforehand, and she'd promised him she wouldn't ask. He was clearly frustrated with her by this point, and he gave me a heads up that she was now telling people around the family that I might be responsible for potentially ruining her marriage. I still don't fully understand the logic behind that claim, but it told me exactly how far this had already spiraled in her mind. My dad kept the pressure up too, sending texts along the lines of hoping I was happy, since apparently my sister hadn't stopped crying since the barbecue. Message after message, all some version of the same guilt. At that point, My fiancé and I sat down and made a decision. We removed my sister from the bridal party entirely and replaced her with my aunt, who had been the only person in my family willing to actually take my side through any of this. We hadn't decided yet whether to invite the rest of my family as a whole, and honestly, that conversation felt heavier than almost anything else in the whole ordeal. Then my mother escalated things in a way I genuinely didn't see coming. She called my fiancé's parents directly, without telling me first, and told them it would be best for everyone if my sister simply got the venue, and made it clear that if my family kept playing favorites like this, they risked losing me from their lives entirely. My mother ended up in tears after that call too, and told people my father-in-law had been an ass to her. At that point, the whole situation felt less like a family disagreement, and more like something out of a bad soap opera, the kind you'd roll your eyes at if it wasn't your own life. That same night, my in-laws showed up at our apartment with dinner and a bottle of wine, sat with us, and told us not to worry, that no matter how the rest of this played out, we had a safety net in them. I cried, but for the first time in weeks, it wasn't out of stress. It was relief. Somewhere in the middle of all this, I'd posted about the situation online, mostly just looking for outside perspective, some confirmation I wasn't losing my mind. I didn't expect much. Instead, it spread far beyond anything I anticipated, eventually picked up by actual news outlets covering it as some kind of viral family drama. It's a strange feeling, watching your private family blow up become a headline strangers are commenting on. My sister found out through one of those articles. She lost it, called me accusing me of painting her as unreasonable online, said I'd twisted the story to make her look bad. She told me the opinions of internet strangers shouldn't matter, that family comes before any of that, and that I should be focused on making my family happy instead of validating myself with strangers online. I sent her one message back, and I meant every word of it. I told her I hadn't distorted anything, that I hadn't even described her tone or exaggerated the details, just laid out what happened. I told her maybe she remembered that night differently in her own head, but that didn't change what actually occurred, and then I told her I was done bending to what she wanted at my own expense. I reminded her of years she probably doesn't think about the same way I do. Birthdays I'd had to quietly share with her growing up because she'd throw a fit if she didn't get her own gifts. Being talked into filling out job applications for her because she didn't want to do it herself. And the thing that had honestly hurt worse than almost anything else, how she'd managed to make my own graduation day revolve around her instead. I told her I'd spoiled her too, over the years, and that I wasn't doing it anymore. If she wanted a wedding before the baby came, there were venues built specifically for last-minute bookings, and I gave her one as an option. I told her if this was the thing that broke our relationship, that was a choice she was making, not something I was doing to her. Her only reply was something short and bitter, essentially telling me I must really love myself. Then she blocked me. She unblocked me the next morning to forward me a message, apparently meant for someone else, from a wedding planner confirming a rebooking of a venue under new contract terms, with her responding that she'd be there first thing the next morning to sign. That message alone told me everything I needed to know about how far this had actually gone behind my back. My parents went quiet after the call with my father-in-law. Silence, for the first time in weeks. My older brother, who lives in another city and hadn't been at the barbecue at all, reached out around this time, confused, because he'd heard a very different version of events from our parents. In their retelling, I'd apparently offered the venue to my sister first, then cruelly taken the offer back and humiliated her in front of everyone. I told him what had actually happened, start to finish. He believed me without hesitation, and in the course of that conversation, admitted that part of why he'd moved so far away in the first place was because of how our parents had always treated the two of us growing up. Hearing that from him, someone I hadn't even thought to include in all this, hit harder than most of what my parents or sister had said directly to me, my fiancé, and I spent the next few days doing damage control on the practical side. We called every vendor, called the venue directly, and put passwords and verification requirements on every account tied to the wedding, so nothing could be changed without one of us physically present. We hadn't gotten around to calling our actual wedding planner yet, which is exactly why that forwarded rebooking message had worried me so much. We also made the call to cancel the catering my parents had originally offered to pay for, since at that point I didn't trust that arrangement, not to be quietly redirected somewhere else without my knowledge. Losing that meant scaling things back short term, but our friends and my fiancé's family stepped up without us even having to ask much, offering to help put together a full buffet ourselves. That turned into something unexpectedly nice, a big group cooking night that replaced what would have been separate bachelor and bachelorette parties, everyone chipping in food, time, and effort instead of gifts. When we finally sat down with our actual wedding planner and told her everything, she was horrified. She told us she hadn't spoken to my mother, even once since the original booking 3 years earlier, and confirmed flatly that no one regardless of what they claimed or who they said they were representing, could make changes to our booking without me there in person to authorize it. Once she and the other vendors working our wedding heard the full story, more than one of them offered to bring in extra security for the day itself, at a reduced rate, just as a precaution. As of now, I still don't know if my parents or my sister will ever genuinely apologize for any of this. Some days I think they will eventually, once the dust settles and the story stops being something strangers on the internet are talking about. Other days I've made peace with the possibility that they won't, and that this might just be who they are. What I do know is who actually showed up when it mattered. My brother, who's now walking me down the aisle instead of my father. My aunt, standing where my sister used to stand in the bridal party. My in-laws, who told me I had a safety net before my own parents ever did. And my fiancé, who never once wavered through any of it, even when it would have been easier for him to just tell me to give in and keep the peace if my family comes around before September and apologizes. Genuinely, not just to smooth things over publicly. There's still a place for them at the wedding. If they don't, I already know I'm not walking into that day alone.